host of Jewish philosophical ideas. This is where our inherent desire to do the right thing comes from, because it's from the vestiges of all the Torah that we study that we're now driven in this direction to do the right thing. But one of the lines in this passage says that before a child is born, it is adjured, meaning it's forced to take an oath, be righteous, don't be wicked. Similar idea, that we come into this world having sworn an oath to do the right thing, which makes any violation even worse, because we are sinning not just again on a practical level or on an actionable level in a court, or morality and ethically, but in a spiritual realm as well. Yeah?
It's interesting. I mean, just in reference to what you were saying before, Moabites, it didn't have the rule of Hashem. Civilization hadn't reached a certain level that's obviously acceptable. So in a way, we were given the covenant to civilize human behavior.
Right.
So in other words, which presupposes that genetically or just neutral, one is not necessarily good. You need this external set of rules to civilize.
Well, that's the whole idea. That's why the world is physical. That's why it's not just a spiritual component, because otherwise there'd be no need for any of this stuff. Right? Why do you need this refining elements that we're encountering if there's nothing to refine?
Exactly.
So, there are different levels of refinement. You talk about the Pharaoh and those generations that were doing the wrong thing. That was sort of a test scenario. Without being told to do the right thing, would they do the right thing or not? They did not. So how much worse is it for those who have already been told to do the right thing, that they can't live up to a particular standard? It's sort of held over us as a reason that even if it goes beyond the letter of the law, there's still something that you will be liable for. You can still be held to account even if it doesn't explicitly tell you to do something like this. Which is why the term we mentioned before, bli neder, is articulated a lot in the religious world. Because we don't want to necessarily be held to our commitments. Are you going to be at services tomorrow? Bli neder. You should be there anyway, but you may not be. Bli neder. It's an acceptable comment, it's an acceptable clause to intone to not obligate yourself. But while it's being said to avoid violating one's word, it sort of can fall into overuse. All into bli neder, bli neder, bli neder, bli neder. You become gun shy of taking on any sort of commitment, which is completely antithetical to Judaism, because Judaism by its very nature is a commitment, is an oath. We've already taken the oath, so all your bli nedering, may be good for your own conscience, but it's not really in the spirit of Judaism. There are times when it's important, but to sort of blanket say bli neder, bli neder, bli neder, I think takes it a little bit beyond what we're speaking about and such. So let's look at some of the case studies. We've talked about Beit Din enforcement. We've talked about morality. We've talked about ethics. If you look at it, it's learning exercise 5. Let's look at some of these. So, lawyer verbally commits to charity to do 30 hours of pro bono work. Later, she wants to renege because she has additional paying clients. So, will Beit Din enforce this contract?
No. Depending if she had one of those covenants.
Well, will Beit Din
It's for the charity.
correct? Well, also it's all verbal.
She also is not saying to the. She's also obligated to the paying client.
Right. Okay. What X means no. What about will God mete out justice to one who reneges on this commitment?
Oh, yes. We said yes, because if they can treat them like our own,
What do you think?
In those cases. Saying she made a verbal commitment, she's not keeping it, so she's not being biased herself, even though
She's keeping her other commitments.
Correct. Correct.
she wants to renege.
What you said with the gas of going to your grandma's, other things.
Correct. So I think that you have mitigating circumstances, right? What about?
She's reneging on her word.
Right, but there's a balance.
She needs to earn money.
Correct.
She didn't sit in the first place.
Correct, but you didn't know that in the first place.
But shouldn't we assume that if it's charity, it may be going for pork?
Okay,
So
so
then,
then,
are they obligated to do it? If it's
so
pork?
then you have to start talking about what about your taxes as a count as stucca?
Make
Look,
a
I think,
statement like that.
I think that there's, you know, I think that there's,
She can find someone to replace her. and-
okay, you know, I see Talmudic minds.
This is a I'm sorry.
Also, matters of decree, it could be that it's not a matter of doing it all or doing nothing, but at least keeping it partly.
Okay. Is there a moral expectation to keep the commitment?
I think so.
Okay, a virtuous and pious person ought to keep this commitment.
Yes.
Obliged to keep religion, you know, the religious vows. Well, obviously, if it was, if it was, if a person, everything a person says is also making a deal between them and God, yes. So what about the landlord? The landlord and potential renter verbally agree to sign a rental agreement on the following day, but then the next day arrives, one of them changes his mind. Will Beit Din enforce the contract?
No.
No. What about God meting out justice to one who reneges on the commitment? Right. So what if the
What if something happened?
okay? What if the renter put down a deposit?
Then it
says
is-
there's a-
Well, if a renter put down a deposit, would Beit Din enforce it?
Yes.
Yes, because it's a holding up.
Money is not a
there's
means
no
of
king.
I
acquisition.
thought you said if the
There's no
price
king.
changes, also matters.
Remember, Beit Din, you just
You're a
exchanging
king.
money doesn't mean
But
the
a
deal is
deposit
done.
just means you're just not getting the deposit back.
That doesn't count as you picking it up and carrying it away?
No.
What if you wrote it down?
Let's say you made a contract and walked off with the contract, yes. But if there'd been a deposit, there's certainly a mishapara. If I say I'm going to rent it to you and you give me a deposit, the next day I say, you know what, I'm changing my mind.
I mean, if the landlord changed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
If he already took money for it.
Okay, but what I'm saying is if he had already taken money, would the Beit Din
Would a
require him
receipt,
to rent it to the first guy? Probably not.
would a receipt be sufficient, or the actual legal agreement is required? Like
You
you said, I
talking
gave him his money
for
this
Beit
month.
Din to do something or in general?
No, specifically for the
For
Beit
Beit Din, he'd probably have to walk off with the lease. Is there a moral expectation? Is there a virtuous and pious person ought to keep his commitment? Is this a religious obligation? Is this really the same as something between person and God? No, it's just, it doesn't have that seductive component of the last case. What about a customer and a jeweler settle on a price for a silver watch? Later that day, the value of silver depreciates. The customer no longer wants to buy the watch at the agreed upon price. Well, the Beit Din enforce the contract and force him to pay up at a higher level. It's all verbal. It's all commitment. No one's going to make him pay more at this point. What about, will God be in our justice? Is this the sort of mishapara scenario? Well, I think you could argue yes. Why? Because he said, I want to buy this thing. He doesn't say it's necessarily connected to the price. I want to buy it.
That could be a big financial loss.
Okay, all right. You know,
So,
is there a moral expectation to keep this commitment? That could also depend, David, on what you're saying. It's a big financial loss.
But it's also
Moral of the
financial
story
skills
is, right,
on the
everything
side
on
too.
paper.
Right, everything on paper. You want to create a record of everything. I think that goes without saying.
Yeah.
All right, we did the landlord and the renter. Let's look at the.
It's all.
Tom asked the neighbor to help him move out of his apartment. The neighbor at first agrees and then realizes he's not in the mood for homework.
You love this one.
Yeah. So, is the Beit Din going to enforce this? No, there's nothing really to enforce. What about God meting out justice, that mishapara scenario?
I hope so.
No, not really. Is there a moral expectation to keep the commitment? Yes. Is a virtuous and pious person ought to keep this commitment? Yes. Is one obliged to keep religious vows? Is this a religious vow?
I don't think
If,
No,
you
it's
know,
not a religious vow, but.
depends. You're helping another person versus, is it just, sort of helping out and schlepping? Yeah, there seems to be, in many of these cases, this idea of the Beit Din having limited authority. There still being an expectation for a person to live up to their commitments and to go forward with things, sometimes even if it will mean paying more for a product. If you say you're going to buy it, you're going to buy it. I'm going to buy the painting. If you make the commitment. To be pious and upright and virtuous, absolutely, you got to go all the way to the end, no matter the extent. Does this rise to the level of having taken a religious vow? Not necessarily. Baked in is somewhat weak. Your moral expectations are high. Is this a religious obligation? Not so clear. That seems to, if you've been following along, it seems to emerge. A couple of forms of rabbi, they'll give monthly donation to charity, and then they decide not to. So, will the Beit Din enforce? Huh?
No.
What are they going to enforce? It's a promise, right? Will the God mete out justice? Huh?
You hope not. People's circumstances.
Okay. So,
I mean,
I think the question is, does this qualify as a misha para? A person gave the word and now are
Yes.
backing away. Does it apply to misha para?
Yeah.
Maybe. At the same time, it could be looked upon that you made a commitment that you hoped you would keep, but then didn't. Are you a scoundrel? I think that's the misha para litmus test. Are you a dirty, rotten scoundrel
Doesn't it-
for not being able to?
Doesn't it matter whether they're contributing to the building fund or to
No,
the benevolent
that was
fund?
3 weeks ago, all right? The guy says, I'm going to make this commitment. Beit Din can't enforce it. Not paying it off doesn't really mean someone's as bad as the Sodomites. What about a virtuous person? Well, obviously, go commit the commitment. Is it moral? Is it virtuous? Is one obliged to keep a religious vow in this case? Yes. So basically,
I think
even though I can get in trouble for it, I always say clean that when you make your charitable donations. Yes.
I think there's a very practical component here that
Yeah.
if you were to humiliate a person who had the intentions of possibly giving a charity and is unable to do so or reneges for whatever reason,
Right.
then you lose the ability of other people from being given that opportunity to want to do it in the future.
So that would depend on what level of misha para we're talking about. I think that nowadays the misha para is not being stuck there in the stocks and people throwing things at you and the like. It's more as a warning to people to, this could have been the case had you lived in a certain time. You want to treat your word honestly. I think there was a time that it was real, literally, that the wrath of heaven was called upon people who didn't stick with their words. But I think nowadays, as a practical matter, it's really irrelevant. It's the idea that, like Judy said, you're not going to hold out a person and call them a dirty, rotten scoundrel because they're not able to come through on a pledge that they hope to make. That's different than promising to rent the apartment to someone at one price and then taking their deposit and then saying, no, I'm going to rent it for a higher price. I think we could all agree there's a difference. Yeah.
Oh, with this Beit Din thing, could somebody take a non-Jew to Beit Din, or do they both have to be Jews?
No, well, a non-Jew can submit to Beit Din, but usually that's not going to happen.
Okay. So, right, because they have to be both able to.
Right.
Ready
But it
to
could.
accept.
Maybe binding arbitration. The way a Beit Din is looked at in today's American society is as an arbitration panel, and you can submit to binding arbitration. It could be Jew, non-Jew. It could be two non-Jews. Usually doesn't really pay for two non-Jews to pay rabbis to decide their cases, even if they're qualified. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, well, I wouldn't make a commitment like that, personally.
Yeah.
That I'm going to do this and say it because that's really a belief neder. I would hope a rabbi wouldn't accept that as a neder, because I would say, okay, I'll send you a monthly form.
At the end of the day,
And then
it's not what the rabbi says.
But as a
Take out
person, I
a
don't think.
rabbi, a couple puts,
No, but
checks
it's not
off, they're
the-
going to make a commitment.
I just think people in general, or Jews, shouldn't make a statement that it is very binding. I think as a
Okay,
person,
so
if
you-
say
you're-
something
you're-
like when I tell my child I'm gonna be there at the party,
You
then I
will-
make sure I have to be
okay.
there, otherwise I don't say it.
But
Okay,
pledges,
so that,
But then there are circumstances
Okay.
where the bus gets, turned
Ah.
over. But I tell them in advance, I say, God forbid, there are
Okay.
chances that things like that can happen. So
That's,
I want you to adjust yourself to
there's
something.
a wedding invitation out there among, very Zionist couples, that the wedding will take place in Jerusalem, in the courtyard of the temple. And if God forbid Mashiach doesn't come, then it'll take place in England. But there's a difference. You think back to our cases, Stephen Covey says, I'm going to be there, dear. Saying something like that straight out, what kind of expectation does that create? It's very different than saying, I'll be there on time unless the bus gets stuck. Stephen Covey didn't say, I'm going to be there unless my company tells me otherwise. He says, I'm going to be there. You make a commitment, I'm going to give a donation. I'm committing to $200 a month, right? There's plenty of charities, they encourage you to commit to a certain amount each month on your credit card. Okay, so what you're presenting is it makes sense. Say bleed out there in a case like this.
Right, I'm saying.
This would be a
if I
justifiable
wouldn't
one.
say that, then of course I'm.
What about tell a business associate to commit to going to diet after the new year begins. But then,
What
so,
does the business
Well, then don't
associate
feel-
have
it
to
can be
do
your
with
friend,
anything?
I don't know.
I mean,
Alright.
but it doesn't matter, that third party doesn't matter, or second party doesn't matter at all, right?
Correct, it means nothing because there's no impact on the other person. All right. It pays us just spend a moment, when that this case in particular is fresh in our minds, but a lot of what we have seen, has been to recognize the fact that, not just, none of these cases are really actionable, that when we've been talking about an ethical society, there's a justice system, there's what the Beit Din has, there's a recognition of divine justice, there's the concern, the ethics and the morals, there's going beyond expectations, the Thlimi Shurat Hadin, there's doing good even absent social pressure, there's religious law and civil law complementing each other. These are all elements which we encounter. In all of the cases that we saw throughout this course, whether it be the charity or whether it be the supporting of family, there's always going to be whether it be issues of privacy. There's always a balance. There's what the letter of the law says. There's what the spirit of the law says, and there's really ultimately the common desire is to create a scenario. In the words of the prophets, that's there in text number 14, which is, all his words are true and just. Chol dvarav emet v'tzedek. This is one of the blessings of the Haftorah. Right now, everyone's always there for the Haftorah. It's a good time to go out and take a break, but the blessing says that the idea that kol mishpatav, shekol dvarav emet v'tzedek. The idea is there's truth, there's the letter of the law, there's what's right, there's going beyond the letter of the law. And an opportunity to create an environment where there are sometimes answers, but as we saw especially here, the goal is ultimately to try and maximize our potential, to add a dose of spirituality to a very physical world, and to reveal God's words being true and just within a world which sometimes gets lost in the technical details. And the terminology may be different, but all the various laws about commitments can serve as indicators for some of the important foundations for living ethically. And that we look at things as having even small discussions about what seemingly trivial matters are all part of a larger purpose to keep the emphasis and the focus on trying to reveal that which is godly and spiritual about a very physical world. And so we have some building blocks to both living with integrity and living in a more meaningful fashion, and trying to uncover the spiritual root in the physical world. And it's been a pleasure studying with all of you. And I hope we get the chance to study at other times in the future. Those who are interested, next up is Curious Tales of the Talmud, finding personal meaning in the legends of our sages. More information will be forthcoming, but it starts, I believe, Monday night, April 22nd, for 6 sessions. And you'll be receiving soon a email survey. Excellent is what you should all check off. And I hope you have enjoyed the course. Thank you.